of having the software. We are going to do a review of the website as well, the organization and the content, to make sure that the accessibility portion of the website is itself accessible, and that the email that we have there is being used as a tool for feedback should there be concerns or questions related to accessibility. 2019-2020, we're looking at developing a guideline that would be used when different types of events are being planned to ensure that barriers are being considered before a barrier becomes evident. So if we're looking at graduation ceremonies, making sure that we're taking a look at the different types of barriers that might be in place for people who would be coming, without having that person need to actually question or ask for an accommodation for a barrier, that we've thought about it in advance. Again, continuing the training through the professional development software, and then making accessible basic training materials for volunteers. So the committee has talked about making sure that our volunteers who are working in our schools as well have information related to accessibility. And in 2020-2021, what we're going to be doing is using the information that we've gathered through the checklist tool to review the effectiveness of our accessibility. We're reviewing the checklist as its own efficacy with respect to, is it identifying barriers? Is it capturing what we are hoping that it is going to capture? Is it telling us what we need to improve upon? And is it a tool that is actually going to feed into the next iteration of the plan? And we are also going to be reviewing the effectiveness of the process that will be developed to prevent and remove those identified barriers, and then reviewing the professional development and training offerings that will provide us some insight into what we need to improve upon, or what we need to change, or what we need to add as we move forward. We are looking in this plan as well to align with the equity and inclusive education plan, and there are opportunities to have us discuss as a committee some shared professional learning for our staff as well. I have included in this presentation this evening the various cross-references, and I now open it to questions or comments.
Trustees, do you have any questions or comments that you would like to direct to Superintendent Perry? Trustee Barry?
Winchester Public, is it okay if I, through the chair, is it okay if I mention this school? Mm-hmm. Winchester Public School has a second level. Does it get an elevator? Just talk to me about Winchester Public School and accessibility, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if I might defer to my colleague, Superintendent Rudders, as she was the past principal of Winchester.
Through you, Chair. Winchester does in fact have an elevator that makes all 3 floors accessible, because we also have basement where students access the area, staff access that area as well. So yeah, it is fully accessible.
Trustee Vice Chair McPherson.
Thank you. Through the chair. You mentioned attitudinal barriers. Could you describe a good example of an attitudinal barrier?
Through you, Mr. Chair, an example might be, and I can use one from my own experience, having a conversation with a parent, and the parent telling me that because her daughter was in a wheelchair, it was often interpreted that her daughter didn't have the cognitive ability to be able to do certain things, when in fact it was a physical limitation that her daughter was experiencing, and cognitively there were no limitations, but because she was in a wheelchair, that attitudinal barrier was there that perceived her to be less capable cognitively.
Thank you.
No further questions? We're going to move on. From that report, there was no motion brought forward from senior staff, so we will move on to item number 602, the average daily enrollment update report, and I will turn this over to Director Sliwa and Superintendent Dawes. Thank you. Director?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, trustees, tonight's report we hope is valuable to trustees, especially many who are newly elected and who are interested in getting a global view about our average daily enrollment across the system. Tonight's report has an appendices to it, as you'll see, that has the list of enrollments by elementary and secondary school by family of schools. That's attended to tonight's report attached to the landing page report that you have on your electronic agenda. Our manager, Sarah Crawford, is also joining Mr. Dawes this evening, who is also an integral part of the department and is responsible as well for generating the report. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Dawes to begin, and then we'll see if there's any questions, Mr. Chair, from the floor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, Chair. Appreciate this opportunity to provide update to trustees on projected ADE enrollments. Our mission, of course, as a board is we prepare all students for a successful life, and our mission is, of course, assisted by effective school and board operations. And an important part of board operations involves how we look at enrollments. ADE is an enrollment format that was first introduced by the Ministry of Education back in 1998. And it's a key way for us to review enrollments attached as they are to ministry funding. Okay. So what exactly is ADE? I want to really take an opportunity with this presentation to inform trustees of several things. I want to bring you up to speed with our updated ADE enrollments, but before that, actually walk you through how to calculate ADE as it relates to the format that we've been using in our board for this enrollment vision for the last number of years. So what is ADE? It's an acronym that stands again for Average Daily Enrollment, and it provides an ongoing measure of attendance of students in schools. So instead of looking at students from a head count perspective at a singular snapshot in time, what ADE does is it takes two key points of time in the school year, October the 31st of each year and March the 31st of each year. So it takes the enrollment from those two key points, puts them together and divides by 2 to get an average. So it's trying to indicate to you what the average enrollment would look like over the course of the entire year. Okay, so hopefully this will become clearer as I explain it to you. The other key thing you want to remember on ADE is it's calculated not by head count, but by a thing called FTE, which is full-time equivalent enrollment. So full-time equivalent is what proportion of a student's time is actually spent in schools. This really isn't relevant in the elementary situation, but it comes into play a bit in the secondary situation. So I hope that point will become clear for you as well as we move forward. So again, ADE is the average of the October 31st enrollment and March 31st enrollment to give you a view of enrollment across the entire school year. So the trick here is that now we have actual enrollments for October the 31st this year. But ADE for the 2018-19 school year is still projected because we don't yet have the March enrollments in place, okay? So we developed original ADE enrollment projections back in the spring so that we were ready to go with school operations. You know, we had an idea through our projected ADE initially what our enrollments we thought would look like. Now we have actual enrollments for October the 31st that we can apply to a recalculation of the ADE. So it's still projected, but it's updated to account for actual enrollments that were in place October the 31st. So I've kind of given you an overview of the definition and the overall methodology of ADE. What I wanted to do now is walk you through how to read the ADE update report. And again, this is a format that we use in the Upper Canada District School Board, but we've used it for a long number of years now, and I just think it would be good, especially for the new trustees around the table, to understand how to read this particular report. So that's my intention for the next few slides. Again, the ADE update report was attached with your package, and you'll see that it's broken down between elementary and secondary panels. There's really, if you think about it, the ADE update report is demonstrated just by the headings on this slide, presents 4 pieces of information. On the left, it presents an indication of what the family of school and school is. So we have an ADE enrollment for every school and then added up by family of schools. Then we have a section to the right of that that calculates how the original projected ADE from last spring was calculated, okay? And then to the right of that, that part of the report looks at the enrollments that were in place on October the 31st, and then how that gets calculated to an updated ADE. And then the final part of the report, over on the far right, provides an opportunity to compare that ADE to last year. So what I'm doing here is just taking, again, that top part and providing some actual enrollment data so that you can look at it and get some context. And I hope you'll forgive me, Trustee Cram, but in alpha order, I decided to put in the Almont family of schools just because it was at the top of the report, okay? So what you're looking at here, when you look to the left, there's the family of schools. It's the Almont family of schools. This is right in your report. And then there's all of the elementary schools, school grades, in the Almont family of schools. So we have Almont Intermediate School. Now, although Almont District High School is a 7 to 12 school, the elementary enrollments 7 to 8 are provided on this part of the report, right? Then we have Naismith, Pakenham, R. Tate McKenzie, and we have an Almont family of schools total at the bottom, okay? So if you look to the right of that, in that shaded area, you'll see this breaks down the original ADE projection that we developed last spring for this current school year, 2018-19. So if I could use the total Almont family of schools as an example, you'll see the October 31st, 2018 FTE, full-time equivalent, projected enrollment was 842. And then to the right of that, our projected enrollment for March, 863. So you take 842 and add 863 and you average that out, you have an average daily enrollment of 853. That was our original enrollment projection ADE for the Almont family of schools last spring. Then we got into this year and we had actual enrollments that were in place for October the 31st. So that's demonstrated in the head count, each by grade, to the right of that. So you can see there's a junior kindergarten right through to grade 8, and special education column with a total enrollment column in column D. So that's a total head count enrollment of 828. So if we transition that to an FTE under column E, you can see that's still 828. Because the FTE enrollment for an elementary panel is the same as the headcount enrollment. To the right of that, we've now got an updated March projection FTE because it accounts for the October actuals, and that's now been changed to 863. So our overall updated AD enrollment for the Almont family of schools is 853. And to the far right, you'll see that that's 13 ADE lower than we originally projected. Okay? Everybody clear so far? Good. So you remember in that other slide I was saying there's a far right part of the table as well, that sometimes when we look at enrollments we want to understand how this year compares to the year previous, and that's what this part of the enrollment report does. It provides a view of our updated ADE and then projects it or compares it to the actual ADE that was in place for the 2017-18 school last year. So in this part of the table you can see again there's that under column G, the updated projected ADE that we talked about before, the 839, and we can see to the right of that under column I that the actual ADE for the Almont family of schools in 2017-18 was 829. So this year, our projected ADE is 10 higher than what was in place actually last year for 2017-18. So that's the purpose of that part of the report. And what we're looking at here is the secondary part of it, right? So here's Almont District High School. And the layout is exactly the same as the elementary. So you have the original projected ADE, you have the grade 9 to 12 head count, and you'll notice under column E, the FTE for Almont is 361. That's actually 2 students lower than the head count of 363, because just a few students at Almont aren't there full time. They would be there part time, so the FTE accounts for that difference, okay? So the updated FTE enrollment is added to the March 31st projected, averaged out, and we get a difference of 12.15. So in other words, our updated projected ADE for the Almont District High School is 12.15 higher than what we originally projected last spring. And then there to the right, again, you can see that comparison to last year. So the overall projected ADE is 6.46 higher than was in place at the school last year as an actual number. Okay. So you'll also notice on page 4 and 6 of the report that you can find the elementary and secondary system totals. And this is an important view because it gives us a sense as to where our overall updated enrollments projected are in relation to what was planned last spring. So if you went to those pages and looked at the system totals, you would notice that the updated total elementary projected ADE of 17,856 is 48 lower than the original projected ADE of 17,904 developed last spring. On the secondary panel, our updated secondary projected ADE of 8,476 is 7.07 higher than the original projected ADE of 8,468 that was developed last spring. So we're feeling very good that our enrollments, as originally projected, are falling in line with what we're seeing this year. That's the big takeaway on the system view. Okay? So, Mr. Chair, that concludes the presentation, but would certainly be happy to entertain any questions that trustees may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Dawes. Trustees, do you have any questions?
Through you, Chair.
Yes, Trustee Swan?
I'm just wondering why, now that we have the 7 to 12 model, are the intermediate students not being reflected under the high school so we can get a truer picture of capacity of schools and what the ADE is?
Thank you, Chair. Through you. The purpose of this report is we want to be able to take all of the elementary enrollments and combine them together so that we can get that elementary view. And there's a reporting mechanism through the Ontario Student Information System that requires that it be formatted that way. But I wouldn't want trustees to think that if they want to see enrollments presented in all sorts of fashions, that certainly is available to you. And in fact, that will be clear to you when we give you the trustee orientation session on the school information profiles. There's a lot of different enrollment views through that particular tool and others that we have available.
Thank you.
Trustee McRae.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What typically would be reasons why the numbers between October 31st would differ from March 31st?
Oh, from March 31st?
Yeah. Yeah, why the change?
Okay, thank you. Through you, Chair. I think what you'll find if you look on the elementary side, and I'll have Sarah jump in if she needs to. On the elementary side, there's not a lot of change that would happen. If it did happen, it would be by virtue of a family moving out of the district to another part of the province or, you know. On the secondary side, a little bit different because we have students that might be in school for semester 1, but not semester 2. So we want to be able to build that accounting into our planning. So in elementary, we would presume that students are going to be there for the full year. On the secondary side, not necessarily the case, particularly as they get into the later grades, 11 and 12.
Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. The victory lappers, do they factor into this at all? The ones that come back for, say, a couple of courses in September?
Thank you, Chair. Great question. Yes, they do. And in fact, that's one of the things that we're really looking for on a school-by-school basis on trend analysis, and there's been trend lines to that. It seemed to be a bit higher, I think, probably about 5 years ago, and we have started to see a bit of a decrease in that area, but we look very closely at the grade 12 because that really is an area of potential variation. So we work very closely with our school principals to get a good, deep understanding of the numbers that we're looking at.
Trustee Cram.
Thank you, Chair. Would I be correct in saying that our ADE and our school enrollment, our school occupancy is not quite the same? And that the elementary, or the 7 and 8 level students are still considered elementary as far as the ministry goes? Would that be a correct assumption?
Superintendent Dawes?
What the 7 and 8 is? Thank you. Through you, Chair. If I understand the question, yes, Grades 7 and 8 students are still considered to be elementary students in the eyes of the ministry, as opposed to grade 9 to 12 students.
Would that account for why our ADEs don't match the school enrollment as far as occupancy goes?
Yes, that's a good point, yes, yeah. Depending on what you're comparing, that's a possibility. Yeah.
Steve McPherson?
Thank you, again, through the chair. I'm looking down your list of secondary schools here, and there is no mention of TR Leger. There's a certain portion of the students at TR Leger that are indeed under 21. Where do those numbers show up on a report like this?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. The TR Leger enrollments are separated out on the last page of the ADE update report.
Very
you'll see
last
them
bit.
there. So we
Found
actually
it.
have two system totals. One shows a secondary system total excluding TR Leger, and then you'll see an area specific to Leger, and then you'll see another system total that accounts for Leger included with the mainstream.
My bad, I didn't scroll far enough.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, a couple years ago now, we had a similar report and we had a motion on the books to attempt to achieve a 1% growth from an enrollment standpoint. And last year we saw that there was a decrease as well. This year it's a slight increase if we balance out the numbers. My question is, what are we doing to still achieve that 1% growth?
Through you, Chair. I am aware, and with the help of the director, we've had different times during the school year when we've reported that information to the Board of Trustees. Our anticipation was to present that information later on in the spring. Given where we're at in the school year as it relates to the revised estimates, knowledge of the trustees around the table as it relates to AD enrollments, and possibility and opportunity for the Accountability Framework Committee to meet and discuss once again the role of capture rates and related materials on overall enrollments.
Supplementary?
I think though, when we tied this in 2 years ago, it was part of the presentation then. And so if we're going to have similar presentations, we need to make sure that all the information comes forward at the same time rather than being assumed or anticipated that it would go somewhere else. Capture rate is a component of whatever our key results indicators and that we talk about from accountability framework, but it's certainly not an accountability framework decision when we drive our budget, when we drive what we're needing to do. And when we look at our enrollment, this is the only revenue generation piece that we have, is the number of students that we have in our buildings. If we have less students, we get less money. With less money, we incur some greater expenses if we continue to have the same amount of EA, same amount of teachers. So if we are realizing that there is a declining birth rate, we see that, but what are we doing to make sure that we keep the students that we have and engage more families to send their students to us? And we know that there are key entry points. The kindergarten piece and the high school pieces are key entry points. And what are we doing then to make sure that we are not losing students and that we are gaining a 1% on a minimum on a regular basis so that we can then achieve some financial stability and also deliver the programmings that we talk to our families about. We need to make sure that we continue to deliver those programs and have the students to help generate those funds.
So the question is, what are we doing with regard to those key entry points?
What are we doing and why are we waiting till the spring? Because then it's budget time and we should be having those discussions much, much sooner.
Director?
So, Mr. Chair, through you, I think it was the intention of staff to start with the ADE discussion. We often, or have, since my time with the board, have brought forward a capture rate discussion as well. The thinking of staff was to have sort of two different types of dialogues about that. I appreciate that it would make more sense to have that blended for future reports. But we were certainly prepared to bring back that to your table for a conversation about capture rates and as well about what our strategies are for retention and maintaining our relationships with families and our students that we have in the system. Members of the board may recall that in our presentation late last spring about our communications plan, that was also woven into that discussion as well. And as we talk about kindergarten registrations, we are also certainly conscious and aware that one of the key reasons why we are trying to invest in that communication strategy is to let parents know that we're open for business, we welcome their children, and we'll welcome a building relationship with them. While we may defer that to the presentation of the communications plan, and again in the spring, we're happy to bring that forward earlier as an early glimpse.
Trustee McCray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following Trustee McDonald's line of thought, do we break it down, the capture rate by school?
Yep.
Mr. Chair, I'll ask Mr. Dawes to speak to that.
Through you, Chair, yes, we do. Yes.
Thank you.
Trustee Barry, you have a question?
Sorry to talk so much, but shouldn't we have the ADE from the year before and the year before that when we get this ADE? Through the chair?
Through you, Chair. Certainly different ways of looking at enrollments. We are very accustomed in our board to presenting historical enrollments. Many reports have come to the board and will continue to present that view. Last year, one of the critical reports that was available to trustees to present that historical view was the presentation that was provided through the community planning and partnership meetings with our municipalities. And we brought to the board the report that we presented at the CPP as an advanced presentation so that you could receive that information beforehand. So certainly happy and anticipating we would come forward with that same report later on in the school year.
Director Sliwa?
Mr. Chair, through you, I heard earlier Mr. Dawes advised that there was a number of different ways that we can present the data that we collect, and if that's also helpful to the purposes of the board, we can certainly provide previous ADE projections and show that comparison.
Director, I sense that there's an appetite for a follow-up report with regard to the 1% growth, capture rate, the entry points. Is that possible?
Yes, Mr. Chair, duly noted, and what we'll do is we'll work with Management Council to set a timeline for bringing that report back in the near future, and try to our very best to answer some questions that was raised this evening. There's another question there.
Trustee Perzier.
Hi.
Sorry, I missed you. I didn't see you.
No, it's okay. That's fine. Through the chair, my question is as this is a ministry document, is it possible, or is it something that is of norm, is to know basically the percentages of other schools within our district, not just schools within our school board? If there's a declining rate, potentially there is just a decrease in population in our region. Is there a cross comparison to know that type of information?
Through you, Chair. Yes, there is. And again, as the director suggested, we'd be happy to come back and present you a wider view on enrollment trends and population trends. It's something that I'm very comfortable in doing and done many times to the board, and be happy to bring it to this group of trustees as well.
That's great. That answers my question. Thank you.
Vice Chair McPherson?
Thank you. Following up on Trustee Barry's comment, why are we comparing projections to actualities? I'm looking at one school here, and it's showing a drop of 22.8 students. Yet if you go back historically, it was a drop of 7 students, actually. Is somebody making poor projections? I think we need to be comparing hard facts against hard facts and not hard facts against projections, because you're gazing into a crystal ball and making an educated guess. But what counts when the rubber hits the road is the actual number of students we get in our classrooms, and that's what we get paid for. We may be budgeting on projections, but it's the actual numbers that count in the end. And I'm talking about PDCI in Perth.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I think what you're getting to really is at the heart of the challenge of ADE as a particular measure of enrollment, okay? What it does is it gives you a view that crosses the entire school year. The disadvantage of it is, as you've suggested, it has to be projected because we don't have the March enrollments yet. And so what we're trying to do is give trustees a sense as to where our enrollments fall in comparison to what our original projections were last year. But you're absolutely right. We would prefer in a perfect world that we would have the actual numbers, but the way that ADE is set up as a methodology, of course, we don't have those actual numbers until the March numbers are actually confirmed. So by virtue of the way the methodology is set up, if you want to compare one year to another year, where we're at in the school year right now, we can only be using projected figures. So it's just a reflection, again, of the way that ADE is used as a methodology. But again, through the ministry, the fact that ADE is its defining methodology for looking at enrollments, we feel compelled to bring this information to you so that you're up to speed.
Are there any further questions? There being none, we will be moving on to item 603, the revised budget estimates and financial forecast number 1. Director Sliwa and Mr. Onley, I will turn this over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, it's our pleasure to bring this update to the board. We provide the board with 3 financial forecasts, 1, 2, and 3. And it is following on the heels of an enrollment report to the board, because as you heard earlier and some of the trustees had mentioned, we are in a student driven funding model, and the Ministry of Education has adopted that model for over 20 years. And because of that, then it's also important for the board to hear, not only based on enrollment trends or fluctuations, where some of our expenses have been, and also where some projected liabilities could be. So we'll turn this over to Mr. Onley in a moment, and hope that the report gives the board the update that they require, since the last time that we talked about the board's budget in May of 2018. So, Mr. Onley?
Thank you very much, Director. Good evening, trustees. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Tonight, the senior team and the finance team are bringing our first financial forecast for the 2018-19 year, which will end on August 31st, 2019. This forecast is based on our revised budget estimates, which were submitted to the Ministry of Education last December. The revised budget estimates are a fine-tuning of the original budget with updated information and revised assumptions that are now incorporated into this forecast. One of the significant inputs for our forecast is student enrollment. And as we saw from our earlier presentation, our planning department provides the enrollment projections based on the number of students as of our October 31st, 2018 count and March 31st, 2019 count. Note that the enrollment numbers that we're using here, thank you. That are using here are based on our November 14th, 2018 enrollment. Now there's many factors that can influence the change in revenue and expenses, and these are incorporated into these revised budget estimates. With tonight's presentation, trustees will see that the forecasted deficit provided to the Ministry of Education stands at $4.7 million. This represents an increase of $2.9 million over the $1.8 million deficit that was previously approved by the Board of Trustees last May.
Can we just make sure we're aligned here? I don't think we're on this slide right now, right?
Well, we'll just jump on to that. We'll just stay with that right now, and I'll give us the timeline here. We will be discussing the steel arbitration settlement in this presentation, but what I'd ask you to keep in mind is that if we did not have the steel arbitrated settlement, I'd be reporting to you a $200,000 variance from our original plan. And keep in mind that's $200,000 over a total budget of $370 million. Now we're on to slide 2 here. Trustees, this is our business cycle. We're currently at the January square in the chart, and that's indicated by the red circle. From the beginning to end, our cycle spans 2 calendar years, and you'll see 2018 as a bar, you'll see 2019 as a bar. The blue-colored boxes represent our 2018-2019 reporting. The gold boxes below represent last year's reporting, and the green boxes below represent next year's reporting. Now, our cycle began on the left when, with the submission of the 2018-19 original budget. That went into the ministry last June 2018. The submission represents the budget that the trustees approved on May 23rd, 2018. Now, during the year, you will see 3 financial forecast updates in January, March, and June. These are represented by 3 blue boxes on top of the chart. This is the first financial forecast number 1, and it's the basis for tonight's presentation. Between financial forecasts number 2 and number 3 on the chart, the business department also prepares a 7-month financial report, and this gets submitted to the ministry in May. The reason for this is that school boards are required to provide this financial data to meet the province's year-end reporting requirements so that the government can consolidate broader public sector organization. The 2018-19 year concludes at the top right with financial statements for the year ended August 31st, 2019. They're audited by KPMG, and they're traditionally provided to the board in presentation in November. You'll also see 2 green boxes below the timeline. These represent reports due to the ministry on the board's 2019-2020 original and revised budgets, and these are due in June and November as marked. We can go to the next. The data in this slide shows the change in the annual forecasted average daily enrollment that was discussed earlier versus what was projected in the spring for original budget purposes. As noted on the slide, the update enrollment is based on the data extracted by the planning department as of November 14th, 2018. You'll note that the overall difference between our original estimates and revised estimates is a decrease of 24 ADE. It's virtually nothing. That forecast was just so good. The primary contributor to the overall decline is grade 4 to 8 category. Okay, go to number 4. Thank you. Slide 4 uses the same overall enrollment figures from our last slide, and it simply breaks them into 2 classifications based on our source of funding. Now, the first classification is pupils of the board. Our funding from these students comes from the Ministry of Education through our GSN grants. That's our grants for student needs. The second classification is other pupils. That's in purple. These are tuition-paying students that include international students and students from the Akwesasne Mohawk Board of Education. The overall reduction of 24 ADE is driven by the decrease in pupils of the board and is partially offset by an increase in the other pupils. There we go. This slide highlights the revenue, expenses, and deficit for ministry compliance purposes. If you take a look at the top half of the slide, the first column is the original approved budget. Our second column is our revised budget. As previously mentioned, the approved budget recorded a deficit of $1.8 million. With our current forecast, the deficit increases by $2.9 million, resulting in a total in-year deficit of $4.7 million. The second half of the slide breaks down the deficit between non-transportation and transportation amounts. As you read across this portion of the slide, you will see the amounts incorporated in the original and revised budgets, along with the resulting change between the two financial cycles. As with the previous slide, we've indicated the deficit for the original and revised budget, along with the change between the two on the top. Listed below are the main contributors impacting the change between the original and revised budgets. The contributing factors have been categorized into two sections. The first three lines represent the change in deficit before transportation. So if we look to the first line, it represents employee future benefit expenses, which are determined by an external actuary who incorporates updated actuarial assumptions such as interest rates, salaries, and mortality rates, and that's done as of October 2018. Line 2 is supply staff expenses. The $200,000 increase in the deficit is based on a review of the recent historical trend costs for supply teachers, educational assistants, and early childhood educators, which indicates a rising trend in replacement costs associated with these three job categories. Line 3 represents interest revenue. Interest rates have risen since spring of 2018, and as a result, the Finance Department has revised its interest calculation, resulting in a $200,000 favorable impact on the deficit. Now, the fourth line subtotals those one to three items, resulting in a $200,000 increase in budget. And that's what I mentioned at the opening of the presentation. It would be nice if we were just talking about that. Now, line 5 and 6 represent the change in deficit related to the transportation operations. Line 5 represents regular transportation operations. The 2017-18 accrual of transportation expenses at year-end was higher than the actual expense that came in, and it created a one-time favorable impact on the 2018-19 year once the 2017 invoices were paid. Line 6 shows the impact of the steel arbitration order, and it represents the imposed arbitration order costs. For compliance purposes, the board is projecting an operational deficit of $4.7 million. The compliance threshold for the board is a deficit of $3.3 million, which represents 1% of the operating allocation. Since the deficit exceeds the threshold deficit allowed by the ministry, the board is deemed to not be compliant. The other compliance threshold is the administration governance envelope. The measurement criteria for this compliance calculation is as follows. The total expenses must not exceed the revenue available according to what has been allocated by the ministry for these purposes. With this forecast, the board is projected to reach this benchmark, and we expect to be fully compliant. This slide provides a snapshot of the board's accumulated surplus based on the revised budget submission that we provided to the ministry in December. Line 1 is our operating accumulated surplus. This represents the availability of funds, if any, that are not committed for an intended purpose and can be used to address any in-year deficit. The last column for this line indicates a projected negative ending balance that we're forecasting to August 31st, 2019 of a deficit of 6.5 million. And again, that's the effect of the STEO effect, I guess if we'd call it that. Line 2 represents the internally appropriated portion of the surplus available to address normally restricted or appropriated amounts to support specific purposes. The revised budget projects a positive ending balance of $6.3 million at August 31st, 2019. When we move to line 3, which is the dark line in the middle, it summarizes line 1 and 2 for the total accumulated surplus available for compliance. A surplus balance would represent what is available to address any in-year calculated deficit for compliance purposes. The projected negative amounts related to the in-year change, 4.7 million in the second column there, and the ending balance of 200,000 in the third column, again, to show that impact of the arbitration. Line 4 is the total externally appropriated surplus designated for purposes other than meeting our regular operational obligations. The surplus on this line is not available to address any in-year deficit calculated for compliance purposes. It really focuses on operational issues. Finally, line 5 is a summary of lines 3 and lines 4 and represents the combined amounts available and unavailable for compliance. So the board is forecasted to end the year with a surplus balance, cumulative surplus balance of $2.7 million. The last slide of this presentation is a reminder of the types of risks and opportunities that the board continues to be exposed to throughout the balance of the years. These items could have material financial impact should one or a combination of these items occur. The impact could be positive or negative on the year-end financial results, depending on the nature of the element involved. For example, our WSIB experience, while we receive periodic updates related to the actual claims incurred, future occurrences really are uncertain and difficult to predict. Changes to prior year claims estimates can also result in a positive or negative impact. Our second semester enrollment is still a projection at this point in time. And as noted early in the presentation, enrollment projections and the revised estimates are based on the updated numbers of students as of October 31st and March 31st, 2019. School operations. After last week, we've seen the effects of volatile weather with 4 days? Yeah, 4 cancellations. These volatile and unpredictable weather patterns we experience can have a significant impact on our costs. Our facilities department has done an excellent track record of managing its various budget lines, but the unpredictability of the weather still persists. Finally, we have actuarial valuations, which are provided by a board-appointed actuary during the year-end financial statement process. This report outlines our liabilities associated with our employee future benefits. And it brings changes to assumptions used in the actuarial calculation of future liabilities, and it can have a significant impact. The assumption used by the actuaries are always changing. They include things such as interest rates, current salary rates, and anticipated claims experience. Mr. Chair, this concludes the presentation of the 2018-19 Board's Revised Budget Forecast Number 1. In closing, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our senior team for their guidance and input into the updates associated with the revised budget. I'd also like to extend a thanks to the business department staff that are tireless with their work on the revised budget and just their support in assisting with the presentation for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Onley. There's a lot to digest there. Trustees? Any questions? Trustee Denner.
Through the chair, I'm just a little bit confused. I don't know if everybody else. In my mind, I'm reading that there's a $4.7 million deficit, which exceeds the ministry threshold. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I'm seeing a $4.7 million deficit at the end of this year that exceeds the ministry threshold. Is that correct?
That's right. Okay. So they set that a threshold of $3.3 million.
And second part of the question would be, through the chair, the major contributor to this larger deficit would be the transportation arbitration?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee McRae.
Thank you. On page 8, third line down, would it be fair to say that the 4.5 million is being taken out of reserves?
Well, when we
of some sort.
Yeah, when we do our compliance calculation, there are reserve numbers that come in to bring ourselves on compliance. And I'm happy to bring that information or provide that to an additional meeting or a subsequent meeting.
Just trying to clarify for my own way of understanding it, that we have the 4.7 deficit. And the 4.5 is being taken from somewhere to reduce that deficit. Is that a fair?
Well,
on this line 3, page 8.
Yes, so at the beginning of the year, we had a total accumulated surplus that's available for compliance of 4.5 million.
Yes.
But then during the year, the number available for compliance is reduced by $4.7 million. So we really have a negative number available for compliance when the ministry does their measurement or calculation.
Well, be that as it may, from my understanding, this money is coming from somewhere to reduce the extra cost because of the transportation issue. And it seems, from my understanding, that the transportation costs, these lump sum payments, are going to increase. We're going to a number of years to pay them off. My question, I guess, ultimately, Mr. Chair, is to ask, will there be this sort of funding available to reduce the costs, the fixed costs that we will have next year because of this?
Yeah,
what are your thoughts?
Well, Mr. Chairman, that is all part of ongoing discussions with the ministry. We've been apprising them of what our situation is.
So this isn't an accumulated reserve that we have sitting somewhere that is being used?
Well, to trace back the original assessment that we had, so you recall a number of 10.5 million that were on our financial statements. And prior to that, we did have a substantial accumulated surplus on our statements. I don't have them in front of me, but I think in the range of $10 million plus. And that wiped that out. And we made that very clear to the minister, and said to the minister, you'd like us to keep your 1% to 2% surplus going just to weather out, the normal up and downs that we might get from year to year. So we made that number clear. We then discuss a second number, and that's what's happening this year. And, the impact it has on our deficit. And the minister, is aware in compliance issues. There's a third number. And the third number is just what you said. What are we going to do on an ongoing basis? Because, the ongoing costs, you're probably in the range for our board of $5 million. Catholic Board is in the same situation, and we are all working very closely together to address that. So it's providing the information to the ministry, and I think that we did in a very persuasive fashion, and providing and discussing options that can be done to bring down the costs, so that the ministry would be predisposed, we would hope, to address this issue for us in a satisfactory way. See, otherwise, all of our operations were right on, with what was budgeted and what was approved. So it's a transportation issue. We're not the only board facing this issue as well, so we're working together with other boards.
Vice Chair McPherson.
Okay. I've been here a long time and I'm confused too. The money that we had in reserve. Over the past several budget cycles, we have building a fund to meet ongoing commitments. I believe we're self-insured as a WSIB. We have retirement gratuities. Is the fund that we pulled money out of that fund? Because I know we were building reserves to meet future commitments. Like, what is that $4.5 million that all of a sudden pops up on screen number 8 here? Where did that come from?
Well, what that represents is what we know are going to be this year's costs, principally this year's costs that are going to be additional to what we had actually established in the original budget. So, when the original budget was brought forward, no one knew that there would be additional steel costs in the year, $4 million that we'd have to deal with. So we've revised our budget to include that.
You found $4.5 million within our budget.
Oh, no, haven't found anything, and that's the whole issue here. We've been given these additional expenses. We're going to have to find a way to deal with it, and that's why we seek, of course, the collective wisdom of the trustees here, why we then look at our own collective wisdom with our superintendent.
Secondary question with the permission.
We're going to have to figure a way, and we're going to have to work with the province to see if they will find a way to address the funding issue. It's not going away, and it's an issue with many boards.
Okay. One more question. We are basically in a non-compliant deficit position by approximately $1.7 million. That's less than half of a percentage point on our overall budget. Do we have any kind of recovery process in place to bring ourselves into compliance before the end of this fiscal year?
Well, that's what we're exploring right now. I've been working with the trustees, with my fellow superintendents to see, what can we do right now? Okay. Are there some expenditures that we can curtail or address? that might bring this into compliance.
Okay.
Just over the compliance line, it would be great. But if we don't have that, we also know that we're dealing with some ongoing issues. Like I said, we still have the ongoing steel boards meeting, I guess, tomorrow. These discussions will be going on. And I understand the trustees will be meeting next week to discuss this in a more fulsome fashion. But to answer your direct question, we're trying to find what we can do in either deferral or cutting of expenses that we're not committed to see if we can bring that down.
Trustee Cram?
Thank you, Chair. Not being an accountant, I don't follow a lot of the numbers. I can see the numbers and I can do the math, but understanding it is a little bit beyond what I really know. However, the two words that struck out when I did it is the word non-compliant. And in the time that I've been here, we've never had a non-compliant budget. I know it's not good when it goes to the ministry. I guess my question is, what are the consequences of staying in a non-compliant budget?
Director?
Mr. Chair, I'll begin. From a regulatory point of view, trustees, the ministry expects us to work within the compliance realm that they've imposed, which is within 1%. We have a really exceptional circumstance here because of the transportation costs. And because of that, the ministry has not followed their regular process of having an external audit because they know where the costs are coming from. It comes from the transportation line. We've been in constant contact with the ministry since February of 2018. So they saw what was potentially going to happen. They're aware of what occurred, and trustees around the table from the previous board will recall that there was a letter from the Deputy Minister that both our board and the Catholic District School Board of Eastern Ontario had received, indicating that they realized that there were some unique and profound financial challenges that came out of the transportation line and that they were continuing to work with us. Because of that, while being in compliance is a concern to us, it is a shared concern right now with the ministry versus their concern would be greater than ours. It's a shared concern at the same level. Secondly, that in terms of as we work more closely with the ministry, it's clear that they see that we have in-year expenses related to the transportation deficit that we already had projected in the March 2018 budget that was passed for 18-19. Of that $1.8 million of deficit projected, 1.1 was for transportation costs starting 18-19. So it is concerning. The concern is one that we hope that we can mitigate by working with the ministry. You've heard this evening that we're interested in sharing with the ministry what we think could be potentially some mitigating factors, either during this current budget year. It's difficult, of course, because the majority of our budget is committed through staffing, and that staffing occurs in last spring and then with the beginning of the school year. We are committed to bringing back, if we have efficiencies that we can find, to present that to you that's in year. It is a very difficult circumstance because we have less flexibility.
Supplementary, Mr. Chair, what happens if we stay in non-compliance for at the end of the school year?
Well, Mr. Chair, through you, I think in our conversation with the ministry thus far, they are taking a current state view and a long-term view about where we're at. It stands to reason that the budget process in 1920 for the board will have to take into account what steps are we taking to manage our deficit. And also, as you heard Mr. Onley in his presentation reference that the Board of Governor representatives on the Stale Board of Governors will need to be listening carefully and understanding what are the proposed efficiencies that in student transportation do not perpetuate the same level of debt. Thirdly, is going to the ministry and sharing with them, here's what we think we can do, and here's what we think that would result in some sort of savings. But in the absence of any of those conversations, we will still be carrying a debt. And this is, again, a concern to the board.
Trustee McDonald.
Thank you. I just wanted to start on slide 5. My concern here is that as much as the previous board passed a deficit budget, which means we are going to spend more than we receive, but was willingly acknowledged that this year we were going to do that, I'm a little shocked that we have 1.1 that's being dedicated to transportation as a deficit when we passed the budget in late May, early June, prior to even knowing what the arbitration was going to be. So that's concerning to me, that we know that we're going to be in a deficit in transportation, although we did not have an arbitration ruling completed at that time. I think I need to have some clarification on that. The next thing I wanted to just touch upon is school boards are under what's called public sector accountability board, whatever. The difference with that criteria though now is that we don't call them reserves; they're called surplus. So, absolutely same meaning. So that's why you see the difference. The one distinction though is that in previous iterations we used to be able to say, well, I think we're going to have a tough time this year, so let's go and have a special motion to pull from our reserves and do that. The change, and you please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the way PSAB works is that we have to incur the expense and then allow it to go through the year and then pull it out at the end of the year into the next year's from our surplus to show it. So it's not like we're able to say, well, we're going to pull reserve out and then we'll have a net neutral amount at the end of the year. So we have to incur the deficit and then we pull it from our surplus. When we look at our compliance piece, I think, my concern is that we continually stand and we continually say that we're working with the ministry. I don't solve my retirement plans by continually buying 649 tickets and hoping that I'm going to win. And I think if we continue to do that, we're going to be in trouble. We're halfway through the year. We have no plan in place to curb existing spending right now that I'm aware of. And if we don't put a curb on existing spending, then we're going to be in worse shape come June when we try to pass a budget. So if we don't have a plan in place, all I hear is we're going to try, we're going to do certain things. I want to have very concrete, very specific measures about what we're going to do to try and reduce the amount of spending that we have in the current year. And if we don't have that, then we'll certainly put a motion on the table that will help us get to that point. Because I don't think it's fair to this board to go into a budget deliberation for the first time with this on their shoulders and potentially being even worse with no information.
Trustee Parizien.
No, I'm okay. My question was answered.
Trustee McRae.
Thank you. Can I go to slide 7? Yes. What's the significance of the admin and governance envelope being given as compliant?
The ministry specifically stipulates what we can spend on administrative expenditures, and we're within the boundaries or within that envelope expenditure. So we're compliant.
Are most envelopes at the board compliant, except for transportation?
Well, the measurement of compliance is only done on the administration and governance and then on the overall budget.
Those are the only two?
For their ministry compliance measurements.
Richard, did you want to add something to that?
Mr. Chair, through you, trustees around the board who may recall the year-end financial statements presented in November also made that distinction as well. And the purpose of making that distinction is to ensure that the board and the public know that the non-compliant overall budget was not as a result of overspending in the admin and governance side of things. As a matter of fact, trustees may recall from that presentation that we were underspent rather than just compliance, so that our expenses matched our revenue. We were underspent in that line and confirmed by our auditors at that time.
Any further questions? There being none? David? Trustee McDonald, do you have a question?
Well, just to my earlier question, do we have a plan in place to reduce our spending?
So, Mr. Chair, through you, senior staff over the last 4 weeks have been looking at what is the opportunities and efficiencies that are available to us in year. Mr. Onley and his staff have been part of the senior staff conversation. We have begun that discussion, and we recognize that the board has an appetite for trying to curb expenses. I want to reiterate that we have very few flexibilities halfway through the budget year, especially given the number of staff that we have allocated. We're committed to looking at what we can do, because I think it's important not only for the board's confidence, but certainly for the discussions that we're involved with the Ministry of Education, showing that we're not trying to contribute to a larger debt. Earlier question from the trustee was about the $1.8 million and $1.1 million in transportation expenses pre-arbitration. My recollection is that that was as a result of the modeling that was done at the STAO board that include efficiencies that would be basing transportation services in 1819 without grandfathering. And because the decision in the spring of 2018 was to stagger the approach to reducing services through walk zones and courtesy riders, empty seat provisions, the board decided at the time, both boards decided, who were part of the consortium, not to address grandfathering in a vigorous way. And as a result, that $1.1 million includes those costs.
Trustee McDonald?
Mr. Director, I've got a hard time with that. For a number of years, we've got 23, 24, 25 million on transportation, and we always operated in that. There was a plan afoot at that time to change the open seat policy, and so that would have reduced spending. So the grandfathering, I have a hard time if we're going to reduce spending by reducing the open seat piece, but grandfathering, or not touching the grandfathering, how that would increase transportation costs. There's something there that I don't like, and I think there's a little bit more that we need to dig into. To my first question, though, around the reduced spending, I'm a little taken back by the comment that it's halfway through and there's not much that we can do. For years, this board has always been in that situation at this time of year. And for some reason or another, when we have a reduction in our students and we see a decline in our enrollment, we have a deficit that might be forecasted. If we've asked for it and we put in place some measures, miraculously we're able to find the funds between now and June and pass the year either with a small surplus or at least a balanced budget. So I think that there is some work that can be done. So in order to do that, I would like to make sure that we have a motion in place so that we can direct administration to start reduced spending. So I'll leave it open. We can either start to reduce by a percentage, we can either start to reduce by a set amount, or I would like to see a report come back on areas that have not been spent, and then we'll make a decision from there. I'll let my colleagues chime in.
Trustees? Floor is open.
I'd second that.
Oh, wait, no, we don't have a motion, so don't.
No,
Go ahead.
Going to that.
Go ahead, Karina.
No, I was going to a comment.
Trustee
Sorry.
Parisi?
Through you, Chair, I would seek the report first to see. We do have 2 meetings coming up very soon. So if the report can be produced of spending that potentially has been forecasted, but maybe we haven't committed to it, or it's projected there, but maybe the contract may not actually happen, or the commitment may not actually occur, then at least we would have some flexibility to see as trustees.
So I would ask for a report back from administration on the year-to-date spending, and percentage of use of current budget.
Is that a motion, trustee McDonald?
And at the first meeting in February, first regular meeting in February.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, moved by trustee McDonald, seconded by trustee Parizien. Did you, yes, just a moment. Did you get that, Lisa?
I have here.
Let's see if we can get it, exactly.
Can I just confirm that the senior administration of the board bring to trustees a report regarding cost-saving measures for the current in-year, to be presented at the first meeting in February. That'll be February 13th.
So the report is to show what our budget was and a percentage of the budget that has been spent in the different areas, so that then we can have an idea of what we can tackle. Not for solutions to it yet. Let's just take a look at where we are.
Okay. I just want to make sure before we proceed.
Question.
Okay, go ahead.
Is there a dollar amount you're looking for? Are we looking to bring ourselves into compliance or open-ended?
The reason for the report is to see where we are, so let's see what we passed the budget at, what have we spent thus far, and what percentage of that is still unspent, and then we can have a discussion around that. We can determine whether it's 1, 3, 5, 10, whatever.
Excuse me, but before we proceed with further discussion on this, I want to make sure the motion is exactly the way you want it, and I want it on the floor first.
So can we read that, Mr. Chair, to you?
Yes, please. I have it in front of me here. Is this the one?
That's it, yes.
The motion reads as follows. That senior administration bring a report to the board on a year-to-date spending and percentage of budget spent in current areas for the first regular meeting in February 2019. I have a mover, trustee McDonald, seconded by trustee Parizien. Any discussion? There being none, please cast your vote. Oops, I lost it here. That motion carries. May we proceed to item 701, please? 701 is a request to amend the board bylaws, and I need, before we move to that, I'm seeking a mover and a seconder. Trustee Cram?
I'll second it.
And trustee Swan. It's moved by trustee Cram, seconded by trustee Swan, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve the board bylaws with revisions as submitted January 30th, 2019. Trustee Cram, I'm going to turn this over to you, please.
How do you work this thing? You want to work it? Yeah. The draft bylaws is coming to you over a 2-year period. We had a committee last year that consisted, as you can see, of myself, trustee McMillan, Kartner, and Richards, and this year the current committee members, again, myself, McDonald, Swan, and McPherson. We've tried desperately to use our motto, if you want, CREW, and the collaboration and the resources, the educational program and wellness, where the collaboration, of course, has been the constant meetings. We've had several meetings that we've gone back and forth. We've used the resources of Lisa to try to give us in our keep us in the right direction and see what we're going to know what we're going to do. As a result of that, we had a lot of change. 2 motions that were passed in May of 23. Basically was to remove the office of the second vice chair and to elect our officer reps and alternate reps. And that has resulted in several changes that you can see in front of you. All of these particular ones resulted in, as a result of those two particular motions. There were some minor word changes that occurred. The four of these that came forward. Basically, 125, I believe, was just a grammatical change that we made. 1015, which is trustee attendance by teleconference, it was define the parameters under which a trustee could join the board by teleconference. 1100 was an automatic adjournment, just again a grammatical change. And in 1315, we made a change to the delivery of the agenda by adding the word business into it. Currently, if the agenda comes to us 3 days before the board meeting, trustees had access to the agenda, and by adding the word business, we're saying it has to be 3 business days before the board meeting. The additions that we've put in, as you can see from there, one was a waiver of the bylaw. Basically, that says at any one particular meeting, if there is an issue that trustees really want to discuss, they can waive the condition in the bylaw that has to be notice of motion by a 2/3 majority. So if 2/3 of the people at the meeting want to discuss something, then you can waive the bylaw and have it discussed. The officers of board, we put in some descriptions of what the officers of the board, what their duties were. And 610, the terms of reference of the committees were put in because there was no terms of reference before. In 625, it basically allows for the election of a committee chair. An administrative member has not been provided to the committee. So some of our committees have an administrative assistant or a superintendent attached to it to give us some advice as to where we're going. But we could have a committee without the superintendent assigned by the director to that particular committee. And this allows us to elect a chair from that, because on the other meetings, the first meeting is always called by the superintendent before the election can be done. The chair to take part in the debate defines the role of the chair and how the process under which the chair can actually vacate the chair to put on the debate in items of interest. Trustee attendance was put into the bylaws, the ministry definition of trustee attendance and what it entails and how many times they have to be at the board table, and it matches exactly what is in the regulations according to the ministry. The student trustee says basically that in a private session, the student trustees are not allowed to be in a private session, and again, that follows the Ministry of Education regulations. Also, with the student trustee, when we have a special meeting, it just defines further that the special meeting is actually considered to be a regular meeting, and therefore student trustee should be at that special meeting. And 13, for order of agenda, we reordered some of the items on the agenda to put them in different spots. The two basically were the report from the director and the report from the chair. In our current bylaws, they come at the very end of the meeting, after the private meeting, and reconvene back into public session. And we've put them up farther into the first part of the regular meeting so that anybody who is listening or the public could have access to the director's comments and the chair's comments before the end of the meeting. Then deletions that occurred, basically the nominating committee was part of the bylaws before, and we basically moved them to the appendix, which is where all of our committees are in the terms of reference of the committees. It just defined in our current bylaws, there's a nominating committee mentioned, but it doesn't say what they're to do. And so it puts that in. And the board resolution, we moved 1105 to actually 705. And then finally, we replaced some sections. In our current bylaws for the election of executive officers, there is a process to elect the chair. The same process is repeated for the vice chair, and the same process is repeated And so it was in the bylaws 3 or 4 times for every executive position. And basically, we pulled them out, deleted them, and replaced it by one process, regardless of what elected position is. It's the same process. It just makes it easier. And mandated by the chair was... What did we do with... Oh, we amended it by just moving it to another section. That's all we did with that. The suggested changes will also result in an organization of the numbers in our bylaws, but the committee has ensured that the bylaws that have not been changed are included. The bylaws also will be reformatted in order to be more easily accessible on our website and again on board docs, so that they're easier to find and easier to access. Are there any questions? Myself or a committee member may be able to answer better.
Floor is open for questions. I see none. We have a motion on the floor. We have a motion on the floor, right? Yeah. Cast your vote, please. The motion passes. I want to thank Trustee Cram for his long-standing work on this ongoing project, and we now have very tight, up-to-date bylaws. Thank you very much. And thank your committee. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, to we are now 8:01. These are information.
Just information reports.
So therefore,
901.
you have 801, 802, 803, 804 as information items. So we'll move to item number 9. Director?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, you know there's been a lot of great press today around Bell Let's Talk, and I hope that as you were following our social media channels that you've seen that it's not just one day that Upper Canada devotes to talking about child and youth mental health. We talk about it and we walk the talk. And part of that is I hope that you saw that what we were promoting was our mental health plan that we have that was brought last to the board at the end of June 2018, where we updated the board on where we were in that 3-year journey. As well, you also would have seen references to different types of strategies and staff development that we're using in our school district to support students and to make sure that our staff are properly prepared to work with students who are presenting with any kind of mental health needs, and also to work on proactively mental health in that we want people to be healthy physically and mentally, and steps that we're taking that way. It's really important that we're, as a society and as a community, talking about mental health. It's also important that our parents, our students, and our local communities know that the Public School Board takes that seriously. So I hope, Mr. Chair, that people saw that throughout the course of the day, and I know that the board will be touching upon that topic multiple times throughout this year.
Thank you, Director. As has been my custom, I am ceding my remarks to various trustees, and on this occasion, as I have asked you, I'm asking the trustees who attended the Public Education Symposium to report on any takeaways, positive takeaways that they may have learned, that they may have heard, that they may have people they may have talked to that were of interest in other words, how it advanced you and your education as a trustee. I'm going to start with Trustee Schooler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was beneficial for me to attend this conference in many ways. I certainly appreciated the opportunity to hear from veterans of the role of trustee, especially around governance, role of the trustee, and current issues. But I think what was most important for me was to be in the room with Don Drummond, And his message to us was rather sobering in that he was not terribly optimistic about the current fiscal situation in the province of Ontario, which makes the job that we have to do as trustees in providing quality education very complicated and challenging. What was uplifting, though, was the importance that he put upon education for a society. He recognized that education raises the standard of living for the participants in the process, and so it wasn't a totally oppressive message, but one that did give hope for the job that we have to do as promoters of public education.
Thank you, Trustee Schooler. Trustee McDonald, in spite of your difficulties getting there.
Yeah. Well, I think, for me, every time I attend an OPSPA conference, it's good to reacquaint with some colleagues that you've met previously and established some friendships, but it also gives us an opportunity as a board to get to know each other as well. There's a component built into this that allows us to be more than just table mates, and certainly being able to have some personal discussions with individuals certainly helps grow this board and make us a better board moving into the future. Obviously, all the interactions that we have with the speakers are valuable. It was very nice to see our regional meeting on Saturday morning well attended, and the number of the new trustees that were also present. So hoping that moving forward, some of our regional meetings will be even better attended than in the past. So it's I'm a little biased with OPSPA because I've been on the OPSPA board for some time, and certainly am very proud of the work that they've done to get us to this point. I mean, I think we've got great staff at OPSPA, and we hear on a regular basis that the commitments they have, right from the ED down to the staff members, it's a very indirect way of making sure that the things that we do in our classrooms are positive, and that they do everything possible to interact with the government and make influential changes around their policy that will help students. So it's enlightening to hear their conversations and the information that they provide to us on the actions that they're taking on a regular basis around labor relations and around legislation updates, around just the difficulty it is sometimes to be able to influence and get those changes made. So obviously a good time, and I'm looking forward to the AGM. I just want to put a pitch in now. The AGM is in July, and it's going to be well attended because it is a Canadian School Board Association conference as well. So obviously some good speakers coming up for that as well. For Toronto.
Thank you, Trustee McDonald. Trustee McCray.
Yes, Mr. Drummond, when he spoke, was impressive, but recalling it, I would say that being in the same place as the representatives for the largest stakeholder in our system, the students. And the student trustees, I thought they really presented themselves very well, and I was a little disappointed that our student trustee, because of exams, couldn't be there. But I was pretty impressed by how they comported themselves.
Thank you. Trustee Barry.
You sure?
Always.
Okay, now this was a very serious symposium, and I hope I'm not insulting your intelligence by doing this. It's called When Things Go Off the Rails, and it's kind of what I'm sort of afraid of. So we'll set the scene. There was 3 sets of board chairs and directors, so 6 people on the stage discussing interaction of these teams with their challenges of such things as setting the agenda, committee systems, and then one example of an interesting situation. One set, the board chair was Matthew Reed, already retired as board chair at 32 years of age. Smart-looking young lawyer. Director Laura Elliott. This chair and director are Thames Valley District School Board, 184 elementary schools, 30 secondary schools, London, St. Thomas, Woodstock, Ingersoll, Tillsonburg, others. I believe the background was the year previous, the prom date affair occurred in which the separate school would not allow a young man to take his boyfriend to the prom. I think that was the background. This man was very confused. He broke down in tears in this thing. So it was kind of confusing, but that's the background. So the following year, a theatrical group produced a play using this as the plot. The separate school was portrayed harshly. The director was called a douchebag. There was two boys kissing. The funding for this theatrical group was from various sources, but $15,000 came from the separate board and $15,000 came from the public board, and the funding was withdrawn by both these boards. Poor old Matthew knew nothing of this. He gets a call. And in the conversation, he became quite emotional because he said, we were accused, the public board was accused of being homophobic because they had withdrawn it because it was two boys kissing in this play. When in actual fact, the funding had been withdrawn by the director and the staff, but he didn't know that at this point. It's Thursday, and he went through it day by day. So he circled the wagons, which would be the rookie trustees like I am. And I could project myself into this spot and thinking of myself getting a phone call from the Winchester Press or the Morrisburg Leader, and these facts being thrown at you, and you just sort of, your whole head would be just going woo, woo. So, you know, I could project myself, not in the Matthew spot, but as a rookie trustee. Yes, John, okay. But I thought there was a bit of humor in this. Like, this is just how things go off the rails. And he went through it day by day, and I won't bore you with any more of the details. But things were just definitely out of control. And this guy was a lawyer at that age and retired at 32. You can imagine how bright this guy is, and he was whirling. And I just found it humorous about the way that some of the things that are going to come at us are going to be very unexpected. And I think one of the purposes of the symposium was get ready for some bizarre situations in the future and learn to say, I'll get back to you once I get the facts, and be very careful about what you say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barry. Trustee Krem.
Thank you, Chair. I had three moments that passed. One was the student trustee presentation that OSTA did with their vision of where they would like to go with students over the next 5 or 6 years. Very impressed with the vision that they had, how they're going to accomplish it. Whether they can accomplish it or not is another issue, but how they intend to do that. One lady did, one of the student trustees did a marvelous presentation as to how she found an issue, a situation in her schools, and was able to track it down and work through the board in getting proposals done. The second one was the one with the directors and the chairs of the board, to see how different boards react and how their boards operate, so that you could see how things need to become a win-win. Was one of the words that both the chair and the director used, is that if we don't come out with a win-win, we're only hurting ourselves in the long run. So that was one of the messages I got out of that. And the other one I got was out of one of our guest speakers, who had much along the same lines as a win-win, and his expression was, find the sweet spot. And you find the sweet spot in anything that's going on, regardless of how difficult things are, that sweet spot will always do you good justice.
Thank you, Trustee Cran. Trustee Petizier.
Okay, great. So the symposium I found was an opportunity as a new trustee you wouldn't want to miss. There was 300 trustees in the same room. A little overwhelming maybe for some of us new folks that didn't know there would be that many trustees, maybe 100, 150, 300. It was great. We were 300 trustees that all sort of had the same similar drive and interest towards education. We may go about it in different ways, but at the end, we were all there to support our cause, learn more, become better at what we do, and help our students, our schools, our staff to just be better all around people, share information with each other. Some may not know, some may know, maybe to the public that are watching, that we were also there with the French Public Board of Education. So that was also as well. Part of the presentations were done in French and they were done in English, which was really nice as being a bilingual trustee. So it was sort of, you got to share both sides of the coin with them, see what some of their accomplishments. We didn't share the workshops all with them, but at least after the fact, we could have discussions with them to see what were going on in their schools. And it gave you opportunity to maybe meet the French Public Board trustee in your region. So it was really great. I very much enjoyed it. I look forward to next year. I attended the same summer workshops as everyone else. The two things that maybe weren't mentioned is there was two amazing musical acts. One done by a high school near Toronto, and the other one done by the French high school in Petanguishene, Ontario. And that was great because you actually had two teachers in the band, even though the one teacher was the director of it, he also played. So he jumped in. So you could see the passion of the educators with their students. And here I was wondering why there was a group of students coming up the escalator and they got to stay at the Sheridan. I was like, I went to the wrong high school. Because really, if you're going to high school and you're staying at the Sheridan, lucky you. Next thing you know, 3 hours later, they're getting on stage. I'm like, oh, I know those people. I saw them on the escalator. Anyways, it was a great opportunity. And I look forward to attending many more in my future.
Thank you, Trustee Parizan. Trustee Danner.
Ditto to everybody. No, I had a wonderful time. It was my first one. It was a learning experience for me as it was for everybody else. And you get to meet people that you share common interest with, and that was very important. But the thing that stuck with me is similar to you, Rena, is that there were 300 people there dedicated at the end of the day to making student experience and learning the most important thing. And I think no matter we listened to Pinball speak, and he was a little bit of rah, and all that sort of thing, but he talked about the importance of education, and everything seemed to be geared at the event that supported students and went right down to what we're all supposed to be all about, kids. And what I took away from it was in tough economic times and all the negative things floating around and, class caps going up and all these sort of kind of things, I took away from there were 350 people sitting in that room that were committed to kids in public education. And that's what I feel. So I felt very good about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Danaher. I said I wouldn't comment. I'm just going to say that I was very proud of the contingent from the Upper Canada District School Board and their dedication and work at the conference. So thank you. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, to item, we have a motion at this point. I'm seeking for a mover and a seconder. Trustee McDonald, Trustee McRae. The Upper Canada District School Board move into Committee of the Whole, January 30, 2019. We'll take them separately. Will we? Cast your ballot, please, for your vote. That motion passes. The second motion is, again, may I use the same mover and seconder? That the Committee of the Whole move into private session January 30th, 2019. Please cast your ballot. That motion passes. And we are now going into private session. Would you like a 7-minute break until 8:30? Do we need a motion for that? Don't think so, right?
No.
8:30?
It looked like